Before we get into today's episode, I've got some exciting news to share. We are open and welcoming new members into the Natural Super Kids Club. This only happens a few times a year and we're only open for a few days. The club is your one-stop shop for all things kids' health and nutrition, where you get unlimited support from our team of practitioners, as well as resources to make it easy for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Recipes, meal plans, masterclasses, cheat sheets, and so much more. We've made some exciting updates inside the Natural Super Kids Club to make your experience more personalised and easier to navigate. You'll now have access to step-by-step pathways for tackling key health challenges like allergies, eczema, digestion, immunity, fussy eating, mood, sleep, and behaviour. These pathways bring together all the essential masterclasses, cheat sheets, recipes, and supplement recommendations that you will need all in one place. We also have our wellbeing pathways to help you make progress in key areas such as improving your kids' nutrition, reducing their exposure to toxins and chemicals, instilling healthier lifestyle habits, and utilising more natural medicines to support their health. We've added private note-taking, progress tracking so you know exactly where you're up to, and direct naturopath support inside the platform. No Facebook required. With these updates, supporting your child's health has never been easier. Come and check it out and join us at naturalsuperkids.com/NSK for Natural Super Kids -club with a K -open. You'll also find the link in the show notes on our website over at naturalsuperkids.com and on our Instagram as well. We can't wait to welcome you. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast. I'm so excited I don't know if excited is the right word because it's a little heavy, this topic, and my mind was blown after this conversation that I had with Dr. Hayley Dickinson from Eat For You. So we are chatting all about greenwashing and nutrition washing, and what labels are not telling you. I cannot believe some of the information that Hayley shares in this podcast. I felt like I was pretty, up to date in terms of what to look for on food packages particularly. I get the greenwashing on cleaning products and cosmetic products can definitely confuse me for sure. But what we discuss in terms of nutrition washing in this episode, a lot of it was new to me, and I'm sure it will be to you. So let me introduce Hayley to you. I want to say a big thank you to Adele, who is the nutritionist and community care manager on our team, who introduced me to Hayley. They used to work together. So Hayley is a scientist, food integrity specialist, and mum who is passionate about helping people see through the noise of modern food marketing. She's the founder of Eat For You, which is setting new standards in nutrient and pesticide transparency. And she's the co-creator of the Art and Science of Being Human and the Womanhood Project, which explore the deeper layers of well-being, self-awareness, and lived experience. I really connected so beautifully with Hayley. We are very much on the same page. I learnt a lot from her. I think this conversation will be really eye-opening to you. I hope you enjoy it. Send me a message once you've listened to it over on Instagram, or email us, jessica@naturalsuperkids.com. I'd love to hear what came out of this that was new information to you. And I always just love to have conversations with our podcast listeners. So reach out and let us know what you think of this episode. And a huge thank you to Dr. Hayley Dickinson for taking the time to share this really important information with us. Hello, welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, Dr. Hayley Dickinson. I'm so happy to have you here and so excited about this conversation.
Oh, thanks, Jessica. It's a delight to be here. I'm excited too.
So let's start by you telling us a little bit about yourself and I guess what inspired you to start testing food for nutrients and pesticides?
Great question. So my background is in science. So I have a PhD in reproductive physiology. So that's sort of where I really cut my teeth in kind of thinking about the impact of, what we eat and what the consequences of that might be for our babies and, their long-term life health. But I think it was really once I was pregnant with my daughter, Cody, and she's 13 now, that really made me realize, that kind of responsibility that we take on once we have children to really, I think it really helps us kind of realign with thinking about those, really healthy and nutritious foods. So I was still in the lab at the time and, it was the obstetrician basically said to me, I'll just start taking this prenatal supplement. And I remember thinking, does that mean that I actually can't meet my nutritional requirements at this time with food? Like it was just something that I had never really, really thought about. But that recommendation was just so widespread that I thought, that's an interesting kind of thing. But that was just sort of a little seed that got planted. And then obviously, I cleaned up my own diet and, Cody came along and I really wanted her eating well. So, it becomes a part of your life. And then the research that we were doing really quite clearly showed that the things that we do along our pregnancy journey impacts the way that our baby's organs will develop, and then that can have an impact on their long-term health. If we're not optimizing our conditions, then we might sort of give them some, I guess, perhaps not as full a tank as they might otherwise have got if our tank was full, I guess. And so, all of these things were sort of weaving their way in my brain. And then I decided to leave academia, and that's definitely a story for another time. But I started a company called Eat For You. And what I really wanted to do was sort of hit that market of those women and their pregnancy journey and help them meet those nutritional requirements with food, because I really did believe that that should be our right and a possibility to just eat good, clean food and get everything that you needed. And so one of the things that was really important to me in starting that business and offering that to particularly pregnant women, and the company did expand to be sort of broader for others as well, but we started nutrient testing our products. So we were, and I still think that we would be if we were still in business, the only company that did that on every batch. So every time we'd make a batch, we'd send some bars off. So those very same ones that got packaged and sent to stores, some of them would get sent off, and we'd do a full analysis of the nutrients in our food, and we would then share that. So there was a QR code on our food, and you could scan and you could see exactly what was in there. And I'm smiling as I tell you this story, but it was actually quite it was a very disconcerting series of experiments, because we were using certified organic ingredients. So it was we were looking at sort of what we thought would be the most premium, kind of best ingredients you could get. But there were several times where I would have expected a very high percentage of a particular nutrient. And let's use selenium as an example, because that's one that I spent a lot of time examining. And the first batch of bars that we made, we measured selenium and there was none. Like zero detectable selenium. And we had put enough Brazil nuts in there based on, the databases that tell us how much selenium is in a nut, enough to give you your full daily requirement. And yet there was zero. So I was a bit like, what does this mean? Like, did our manufacturers forget to put the Brazil nuts in? Or is it a bigger story? And it turned out that it was a much, much bigger story. So what we learned, we sort of, did you hear that, chicken?
No, I didn't. Was it a chicken in the background? I didn't even hear.
Rooster at the door. Oh, we live on 130 acres with friends, and so I'm actually in the office of my friends because the internet is much better here. But the roosters often come and sit, and Dame has shared that experience, and I'm sorry, that was the first time I've experienced that live.
Oh, that's fine.
It's a shame you didn't hear that. You might hear it on the playback. Yeah. Anyway, there's a rooster at the door. But so what we did was kind of go, okay, we need to understand how big this selenium story is, because I really wanted to be able to Well, I really thought I was, and I really wanted to tell the truth, and I also really wanted my food to be nutritious. So we sent a whole variety of Brazil nuts off for testing. And what, you will be familiar with the recommendation, eat 2 Brazil nuts a day to get your daily requirement of selenium. And so of the 5 different sources of Brazil nuts that we sent away, none of them met that requirement. You either needed to eat between 5 and 21 Brazil nuts to get the daily requirement of selenium. And so you can imagine, obviously for me as a brand owner at the time, I was like, it's over. That's the whole point of doing this, and I can't get this nutrient to people. And so it made me really start to question those nutrition information panels that are sitting on all of our packaged food, because most people just aren't asking the questions. So we're really just guessing. And so it was sort of that experience with Eat For You ourselves that really made me realize that there's a big gap between what we see when we're in the supermarket, turning over those packages and looking at the nutrients. There's a really big gap between what that says and what can actually be in the packet. And so, again, long story short, there just wasn't enough of a market for a very premium snack bar because, of course, those things, that regular testing and the home compostable packaging and all of the things that we built into the product, it just meant that the bar just needed to be beyond the, accessibility of most people.
Yes, it would be like $10 for a bar.
It essentially needed to be $10 for a bar for us to have any margin. And, I'm so passionate about it that I just kept doing it. But I was, the account manager's going, Hayley, you actually just can't keep doing this. And so I let that go, but I realized that selenium story, and there were other nutrients that sort of told similar stories, really opened up this space where we're not asking the questions. So until we're brave enough to go in there and say what really is in our food, that the food that lands in our homes, there's lots of certifications, organic certified is a great one. And that's really talks about inputs and so what happens on the farm. But there's actually it doesn't follow through. There's a lot of hypotheses and a lot of assumptions, and there's a lot of science that suggests that maybe we're getting more nutrients, but we're actually not asking those questions of those producers. And we're paying a real premium for that. So now that's what I do. So I sit there in that space with farmers and food producers, and the brave ones, really, who are willing to say, let's have a look. Let's see what's in there. And it's extraordinary because sometimes what should be there just isn't there.
Isn't.
But the beautiful thing is that they know that now. And of course, there are lots of things that influence the nutrients that end up in our food. Obviously, at the very beginning, it's the health of the soil. Are those minerals even in the soil? And then even if they are in the soil, do we have the fungi and the bacteria, the small critters in there that obviously we have them in our own bodies that are really important, but they're critical to move those minerals from the soil and, up into our food. So it's extraordinary. Like, I have such a good time asking those questions. And I guess the other thing that, aside from the nutrients, which really is my passion piece, but also we're asking about that sort of that clean element, the pesticide residues. And that really came about in an unexpected way. So last year, I was working for a truffle product company. And there was an issue in the Australian export of truffles because in another country, they were doing random port testing of pesticide residues. And some of our containers failed. So there was a random test that detected essentially DDT. It's sort of the breakdown of DDT. And of course, that's been banned in this country for a very long time. And that farm was not actively using DDT, but because these things tend to have a bit of a legacy, they'll sit in the soil for a long time. And this was turning up. And so you sort of, again, you realize that it's not even just what we're doing today, especially in this country. There is a legacy. There is a long legacy of industrial agriculture that just didn't know. We just didn't know the impacts of these things. And so, again, farmers are getting really brave because they, like us, want good, clean food. They want to be eating the food they're growing as well. So that's the other arm of the work that we do now. It's really helping producers prove that they're clean, prove that they're nutrient dense. And if they're not, it's not a shaming exercise. It's a real opportunity to then say, well, what are the things that we can do to clean up the soil, to improve the nutrients, to really get it into the food?
Yes. Wow. This is fascinating to me. And part of me is like, I just want to put my head the sand and not know about this and not ask you any more questions.
Yes, I feel
But
that too.
like, obviously this is so important, but it's like, it's questioning everything that we think we know when it comes to even, a lot of our audience would look at themselves as conscious, food consumers who are, like buying organic or checking labels. And so, we're going to get into this conversation, and there will be hope in this conversation as well.
Yes,
but I think that this is fascinating. And, going back to the Brazil nuts and the testing that you were doing, I imagine, the vast majority of food producers are certainly not testing every batch that's going through. Like, no one would be doing that because of the costs involved. So, okay. So let's go on to greenwashing and nutrition washing. So can you explain what these things are for any listeners that might not know, and some of the common tactics that you see on packaged foods, when it comes to greenwashing and nutrition washing?
Yeah, I can. So greenwashing is that sort of language that makes us think that we're doing an environmentally positive thing. So it often can be about the packaging. Sometimes you might see things like biodegradable, you might see compostable, and it can be, those sorts of, eco, these sorts of words that really, even the colouring that gets used on packaging. So it's very emotive. It really gives us that feel good experience in the supermarket or in the health food store or wherever we do our shopping. And so it's a really tricky trick by marketers, because almost always those words are unregulated, which means that there's no overarching body that these sort of labels have to be approved by before they can go on the shelf. So, even the word organic in Australia, for now, it is, I believe, getting much, much closer to being regulated. But the word organic on its own can sit on a label, it can sit in a brand name, it can sit in a marketing story without any certified organic ingredients actually being in that product. So that's kind of more of a nutrient washing, I suppose. But also, we think that it's clean. When we see the word organic, we really think, green, clean, good for my family.
And even the word, I'm thinking earth, in some brands that make us, and the material that's used in packaging, if it's more, the paper rather than the plastic. There's so many things that can confuse us, isn't there?
There are so many things. And it's really quite mean, because it really hits those, because that's what we all want. We all want to be looking after our families in a way that has us also not causing harm to the environment that we're all living in. So it's a really quite a manipulative tactic. So I guess that's sort of the greenwashing. And then when I think about nutrient washing, it's those claims that you might see on the front of a packet. So it might, have a big superfoods, or, even the health star rating is one that's it's a tricky thing, because, I do hope that the foundation of that was to try to make decisions for families easier. But just the way that it's been built and structured, it just doesn't tell a healthful story in any way. So
no, it's a big fail, isn't it? And we've got another episode actually where I'm sharing more about health star rating. So I'll share that in the show notes.
Yeah, great. That's really helpful, because it is a big story to tell, because it's on so many foods.
Yeah.
And so, I think the other thing might be in terms of the nutrient washing, it's mostly those big claims. It might be immune boosting, or, just so often there's a real contrast between what's said on the front of the packet and then what is said on the back of the packet. And then, as I said earlier, what then even the reality is inside the packet. And so I think the most challenging thing here for people is that it requires so much time to actually get beyond sort of being tricked. And it's not a reflection of a lack of care or knowledge. It's simply that the tactics are just so psychologically manipulative that even I get tripped. I get things home and then I'm doing it and I'm like, oh mate, like, what have you done? So it happens to everybody. And it's really quite brutal.
Yeah, and it's really playing on our busy lives, isn't it? We see those claims, this looks healthy, that looks good for the environment, and we just grab it off the shelves. And, the fact that you even get tricked into it, that says something, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, and it's words like natural Or,
Yes.
and sometimes it's even words that are sort of, it's a lifestyle. So, gluten-free or vegan or plant-based, even though those claims often are accurate for what they truly mean, which is gluten-free, there's no gluten, vegan, no animal products, plant-based, everything's made from plants, that doesn't equal healthy and that
No.
doesn't equal nutritious. And
That's
so
yes, that's
these are
a
the
really big one.
things that really can catch us out. And even certified organic doesn't mean healthy or nutritious. There is just as much certified organic cane sugar now as there was, not organic sugar. So it's still about having that little bit of discernment, I suppose. Those words are just, they're just words and they're not regulated and they're not policed. And so unfortunately, we still really have to take a lot of that responsibility on for ourselves.
Yeah, and that's such a good example. Something can be certified organic, but it could be 90% sugar. It doesn't mean it's necessarily healthy. Something could be gluten-free, but it could be full of, inflammatory seed oils. So really important to look at the ingredient list and ignore all of the health claims and the way that the packaging looks, which is easier said than done when we're, busy parents.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess that's, there's a hope piece here, I suppose. That's sort of where looking more to that fresh end of the supermarket, you're less likely to get caught out there. A carrot is still a carrot. And, even so, you still get that. But if it's, conventional versus organic, what am I really getting? And that's, no one knows. I think that's really the key point around organic versus conventional. There's still a lot of grey in what you're actually getting. And so I think for your family, it's a decision that you need to make around what you prioritize. And I was talking to my beautiful friend Amy today. She's very much sort of in this. She's got 3 children and she runs a farm. And so there's lots of thought around nutrients. And I was like, what's the one thing? Like if there was one thing that you could say to people who kind of getting on this journey of I want to clean up my food, but holy moly, it's really hard. It's sort of that, what is the one thing the kids eat the most of? And for her family, it's milk. They drink more milk than anything else. And so she prioritizes getting the best milk she can. And so it's sort of, it's just these, it doesn't have to be everything. It can feel like that, but it really doesn't have to be. It can be one, maybe even each time you go to the shops, just one thing that sort of gets swapped in or swapped out. And before you know it, you're 10 weeks down and there are 10 different foods that your kids are eating that they either weren't before or that they eat so much of that it can have a really big impact.
Yeah, I love that tip. That's really important. Look at like the things that are being eaten in high volumes in your family and change those things first. And this is why I'm just such a fan of the farmers market. I'm very lucky to be near an amazing farmers market. And, there's more and more of them popping up, I think, in different areas. I know they're not accessible to everybody. But I just find when I shop at the farmers market, so much less plastic and packaging. And even though, it's not all certified organic, but I know that I'm buying locally sort of grown, I can talk to the farmers and they tend to be, I think, fairly straightforward. They'll say, yeah, we do spray, but we use minimal sprays or we only use these sprays or so I love that getting closer to the, the grower, if and when we can.
Yeah, look, I really agree with that. And I'm in a similar position to you where we do have great farmers markets up here. And I think I agree in that it is a lot more challenging to tell a non-truth to someone's face. When you're standing there and they're there with their children and you do get the true story most of the time, I think. But when it's just on a packet, there's no connection. That human connection is missing, and therefore it just becomes a different game. It just becomes about selling a product, not really honouring and nourishing humans, which is fundamentally what food is all about. But
yeah, and we've got to, they're huge businesses. Some of these food producers, so it's all about profit and how they can I guess produce the food for as little as possible and then sell it for, as much of a margin as they can.
That's right. And I can go back to my Eat For You when we were making food experience. And, that margin was too small for us. We just couldn't operate from there. And so, the suggestions that get made by people that sit in that space around increasing my margin, like they are, to me, I'm just going to be straight up. They're shady. So they were just not things that we were willing to do. And, you know, even when we were having those nutrition issues that we weren't hitting the targets that we should have been with the food we were putting in, again, the suggestion is, well, you know, we can just pop in a nutrient powder. Just let us know what sort of nutrient levels you want to reach. And so these are the games that get played that, you know, they ignore the fact that those raw ingredients are nutritionally deficient. Just don't worry about that. We'll just bump them up with synthetics. And so there's the sorts of games that sit particularly, I think, in that packaged food space. And so again, you know, I guess I know families are, you know, so time poor. Like I've only got one daughter, but, you know, it's a lot. And preparing the family meal, it's a huge time consumer. And then if you're packing lunch boxes and all of those things, there's just so little time. But I guess if you can, and, you know, I think maybe bringing the kids in can also be a really helpful tip, but making those snacks yourself as best you can, then you know what ingredients are going in and you can prioritize, you know, better brands, or, you know, even thinking about, again, this is another rabbit hole, but the country of origin sometimes, because, you know, obviously between harvest and the moment you get the food, so many things have happened. You know, there's storage, there's transport, there's, you know, processing, there's all sorts of things until you end up with whatever ends up in the packet. And that's also true for, you know, fruit and produce if it's not grown particularly in your region. And so I think if you can kind of shorten that up in any sort of way, either minimally processed, so it's harvest packaged and then you're using it, or, you know, harvested and local, you can really maximize the nutrients that you're going to get from your food because they're just not being lost with that time that happens.
Yeah, we had actually we had a question in the membership, and I wanted to pick your brains on this because there's been obviously a lot in the media about the pesticide levels on berries lately. And so our Natural Super Kids Club members are like, oh no, my kids eat loads of berries. What do I do? And there was one particular mum who posted a picture of the organic frozen berries that she's been buying, but they were from, would it be Chile, I think Yeah, I think. And she's like, well, do I go for the organic ones from Chile or do I go from the non-organic ones from Australia? And, you know, it's a really complex question. I mean, how would you answer that?
It can feel like an impossible choice, I think.
Yeah.
And, you know, that blueberry situation, it's not just blueberries. That's just the one that's been revealed right now. But, of course, you know, it's about that consumption. So, you know, I think the data showed that we're eating 10 times more blueberries than we were when that data around those sort of maximum residual levels were determined. And so that just kind of goes to show you that the bureaucratic side of the food system is very slow moving. So it doesn't move as quickly as farmers and producers do around trying to mitigate, you know, they've got to manage pests whatever way they can.
Yes.
You know, I'm a huge fan of organic and a huge fan of regenerative agriculture because it uses more natural processes to do that. But if I'm in the supermarket and I have to choose between a frozen product that's come from Chile or a local product that I now know potentially has more of this chemical than is going to be safe for my child, I will certainly almost always choose the frozen chili blueberry. And I choose frozen a lot, actually, because that's one of those great nutrient holders, you know, so it's a very short time frame from harvest to freeze. And, you know, not everyone would agree with my choice. A lot of people would say, you know, the food miles in there, you know, we should be eating what's grown in Australia, all of those things. But I think the chemical load that our children are exposed to now that, you know, I don't know, Jess, I don't know how old you are, but I figure you're in a similar kind of bracket to me. It's completely shifted. There's just so much more. And so either you would just go without blueberries, I guess is the other option, and maybe choose something that is seasonal in your local area and that doesn't have that kind of concern. But again, unless it's all over ABC or Instagram, we're probably not going to know. These things happen very quietly. They don't really like the chatter that's happening now around this. And so I think it is an impossible choice. And I think it depends where your priorities are. And we all have different values and we all have sort of different priorities. And you've got to go with that. But for me, if my daughter insisted on blueberries, which she probably would because that's such a feature in her smoothies, it would be those frozen ones.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
that's great to get your take. And I think the other point here is like we want to get variety into our kids so that they don't build up these high levels of particular pesticides that might be used on particular crops. And I mean, there's so many benefits to variety in our kids' diet, but there's also a lot of issues with fussy eating and picky eating and, you know, sensory issues in the kids in the families in our audience. So we understand this is not easy. But yeah, I was really keen to pick your brain in terms of what you would choose. So thank you for sharing that. So let's go to like, I guess we sometimes, I guess, misunderstand. We think that like detailed food packaging or, you know, packaging that seems healthy is more reliable or we can trust it more. But can you explain to us why food labels are often misleading, even when they seem like they've got a lot of detail or they seem healthy?
Yes, I can. So one of the things I think that we tend not to understand when we're just buying food off the shelf is that there is actually no expectation of a food producer to test the nutrients in their food. And I know I said I was the only brand that did that, but not because I was the only one who was really interested in that. There's actually no incentive to do so. So there exist these food databases. And so, Australia has several, America has their own, Europe has their own. And these have sort of all of the foods that you could imagine and cooked and prepared in different ways. But they're then sort of tells you how much protein you get from a certain amount of, let's use an almond, for example. So they'll tell you how much protein you'll get, carbs, fats, and if you're lucky, there might be a little bit of a vitamin or mineral analysis attached to that ingredient in these databases that, nutritionists, naturopaths, and food producers have access to these. I mean, anyone can access them, but these sort of people tend to access them quite regularly. And so food producers can just simply enter in the ingredients that they have put in certain portions into this database, and it will spit out what I call a generic NIP, a generic nutrition information panel. And so even when the ingredients list looks pretty good, it's beautifully branded, all of those things, chances are that NIP is from ingredients from really who knows when and from who knows where. And so in preparation for this, actually, Jess, I jumped on to Food Standards and I got access to, the new databases because there's been a recent update to OSNA in 2023. And I was like, amazing. Like this is finally, we're actually starting to get up to date because, of course, the soil today is not the same. It's not the same. The way we transport food, the way we process food, all of those things, all of these things are changing. And so I got really excited and I went back to my old friend, the Brazil nut, and I was so disappointed because there's 3 separate files, of course. So again, it's never straightforward and the information is never all in one place. So I had to go to sort of the supplementary file that speaks to food, where the food comes from. So what food did they use to generate the data to give you those standard nutrition information about the Brazil nut? And so most of the information for the Brazil nut was from 1989. So it's not been updated. And then if you look at the selenium data, that's been borrowed from the USDA list. So they've not even analysed selenium in Brazil nuts that are coming into this country.
Wow.
So the data it means nothing. There is
oh my gosh, I'm horrified by this.
Yes. Yeah, I was really disappointed. I actually had really hoped to have a really good news piece there to add to this conversation to say, but we're doing better. We've cleaned up the databases. They're more up to date. It's telling a current story. But that's not true. It's really not telling the current story. And so that's why this testing, this work that we're doing with these farmers that are so committed, because the databases and the way food can sort of look when we talk about packaged food, it doesn't tell the farmer in Australia story. No. Like they really want good, high quality food getting into the homes of Australian families. I've had enough conversations to know that is just not an anomaly. That's really what they want to be doing. But there are just so many barriers to them. And so these ones that are like, yeah, let's ask the question. Let's make the changes on farm. Let's really gather that data so that we can be delivering these things. It's so incredibly inspiring. It's just not right now.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm just really surprised by that. I would have thought food manufacturers would have at least had to test their particular product once, to get what they sort of state on the food label.
I know, it's wild.
Wow.
It's wild.
So we really cannot trust what's on the food label. We really need to ignore any vitamin mineral content that's on there. And I know lots of brands, add synthetic nutrients, like folic acid is a huge one, right? That's a whole nother discussion, the synthetic folic acid, and how, that can be not great for a lot of people. If they're adding nutrients, I guess it's probably more accurate, in terms of the level that's in there, but we really can't trust any vitamin, mineral, and that would go for like protein, carb, fat amounts on labels as well.
Yeah, so I can tell you again from our Eat Few experience that the macros, so those proteins, fats and carbs, they tend to be more stable. But what we did sort of find was dancing between protein and carbohydrate depending on season. And again, that kind of makes sense, right? So if where the food is growing is really sort of rich in nutrients, it's going to lean to being more protein rich. Whereas, particularly up here in Queensland right now, in the wintertime, our grasses are becoming really nutrient deficient. And so they're heavily, there's not much seed. It's heavily sort of stalk of the grass, so which tends to just be more carb and more fiber than protein. And so we did see those things shift in exactly the same list of ingredients and the same supplier, but depending on the time of year, we would see those macros dance. But otherwise, there's less variability there, I think, than in the vitamins and the minerals. And I would again say that vitamins are your least stable element in a food product. Minerals, they tend to be pretty robust,
a bit more robust,
less susceptible to the processing. But vitamins, it's a tough game, and that really comes back to your bodily health. I think vitamins, we tend to be able to produce a lot more. We can absorb a lot more if we're in pretty good nick and we've got a really well-functioning digestive system and, great microbes. But I'm sure you've talked about all of those things in other places.
Yes, we definitely have. And it comes back to shortening, buying local is huge for those vitamin mineral levels, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, the minimum time from it coming out of the ground to ending up on your plate, that's one of the key things. And, I guess that's another great thing to think about in terms of how do I maximize the nutrients when I'm not even sure if they're really in the food. It's, how much of that sort of real life food can you get into your family's meal? So, is it just having a few herbs on the windowsill? It can sound so simple, but, a sprinkle of fresh parsley, whatever it is, that's going to bring some real life into the meal and help your digestive system, and you're going to get a lot of nutrients out of those things. So you don't need a half-acre patch to be growing lots of things to really maximize the nutrients. You can sort of do it in little bits.
Yes, I love that. The herbs and the leafy greens, and such a good project to do with little kids as well, get them out in the garden growing. So, that's another really good practical tip.
Yeah.
I am scared to ask this question, but I'm also very curious as to what else you've discovered through food testing that has surprised you, and what are some of the really key things that you might not have mentioned so far that parents should be aware of when feeding their families?
It's funny. I think the answer to this question has kind of come up along the way. So, it's things around sort of incomplete messaging, I think, on packaged food especially. So, the word compostable turns up on packaging a lot. And you think, amazing, this means I can put this in my compost, because that's what my brain does instantly when I see that. It's going to break down in my compost. But unless that word is accompanied by home in front of it and a very specific logo, and again, I can share all of these if they're important to people to pop them in the show notes. Without that certification, without that logo, what that word compost means is that it needs to go to an industrial composting facility where high heat and high pressure need to be applied to break down that packaging.
Wow.
So it's those sorts of manipulations that really, I get goosebumps actually, Jessica, when I talk about this stuff, because it's just so obviously unfair. Because that just really, so we're building warehouses and factories holding high pressure, high temperature equipment to break down our packaging, and we're thinking that we're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's much more of those sort of manipulative things. And I guess the other thing I really like to think about again is that, that time from harvest to eat, which we've already talked about, making things at home so that, um, you know, the other great thing actually about produce that you can do at home, let's say we can't meet the financial requirements for organic. It's too hard, or it's not, it's the other thing about organic is that it's not always available everywhere, and Coles and Woolies. I don't like to name and shame. I tend not to do that. But, the organic food there is packaged in plastic. So you're immediately, if you're really trying to follow that clean, green kind of line, you've got to make another big values choice there, don't you? Because I'm ending up with packaging here to get this clean food. So if you can't go there for whatever reason, soaking your veggies, you've probably talked about this already, soaking your veggies and fruit in a bowl with bicarb or baking soda, 15 to 30 minutes, it actually is quite effective at breaking down whatever pesticide residue might be on the produce. So there are definitely things that you can do to protect the family from some of the, some of it's shady, let's be real, but some of it, particularly in, I think, the produce, I don't necessarily think it's shady. I think there's just a lack of awareness around the legacy that is the soil of this country and how intensely farmed it was and how intensely chemically treated it was. I say was, and that's me being a little bit naive. It really still is in so many places. But those sort of legacy ones, if they're not doing the testing, they don't know it's there. And so you can just inadvertently sort of be taking these things on board. But there are some things, like I said, that you can do to kind of mitigate that.
Yeah. And I think we all need, those little glimmers of hope, because I think a lot of listeners will be, really surprised, as I am, from some of this information. So, yeah, I love that you're adding in these little bits and pieces that we can do.
We've got to have some glimmers, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think, food budgets have blown out over the last couple of years anyway. And so there's so many families. I know we can't afford to eat completely organic. And again, you've got to make those choices of, I don't really like the idea of buying a lot of organic produce that's coming from overseas and all of those sorts of things. So the bicarb, soaking in bicarb is a good one. And baking, and we're big fans of like batch baking. So, doing a whole heap of baking one Sunday a month, and making, double and triple batches and, using the bowls while they're still dirty. It's sort of, and then popping stuff in the freezer for kids to grab out for snacks in lunch boxes and things. So those things that you can really implement do make a big difference, I think.
They do. I agree entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So beyond food, your work, like you do work across other areas of wellbeing and self-awareness. Can you tell us more about the art and science of being human and the Womanhood Project? I'm really interested to hear more about these projects and how they connect to your bigger mission.
I find that these new projects really they bring balance to my life, because as you can see, as we've talked about, it's really quite overwhelming, and it's really quite you're really dancing in that sort of denser energy in that food space.
It's heavy, right? And it's frustrating, really, and it would make you so mad.
Yeah, it really, really does. And so you've got to have balance in your life. And so what I've sort of come to realize is that food is only one part, I think, of those key things that really impact our well-being. And so I think there's also the need to really acknowledge and express, which we have done today, how we're feeling about things. Our emotional processing, I think, is a really key part. And I did not come from a family where that was my native language. I come from a family where we just like sweep that under the rug, and you just sort of don't deal with that. So as I've gotten older and as I've sort of learned, I guess maybe too, having a daughter, you realize how important it is to move those things out of your body. And so the art and science of being human is really just kind of dancing in that space, witnessing people as they go, holy crap, I don't know how to have a conversation about how I'm feeling. And so it's just that really rich, beautiful space, because we've sort of, we've brushed over a couple of pretty major transitional moments in my life. And so in those times, I really leaned on these tools to really help myself process, I think, some really big stuff. And then, so the Womanhood Project is even newer. That is super, super fresh. And it's about these sort of key moments in our life where transitions might be not as honoured as they perhaps could be. And sort of we're missing opportunities, I think, when our young girls sort of come through puberty, same for our young boys, but obviously given it's called womanhood, we're focusing on women and young girls. But, that's sort of creating a bit of ritual and magic and wonder around that life transition rather than, here's a tampon, go deal with it.
Yeah, there's awkwardness and dread and like, oh no, here we go kind of feeling.
Yeah, sort of, and then sort of medicalizing it rather than acknowledging that those bodily signals that come in those times tell us so much about what is happening for our physiology and for our well-being. And so they're real beautiful portals, beautiful opportunities to go, maybe something's a bit off, maybe I'm not getting enough of insert nutrient X, Y, or Z. And, it's sort of a beautiful way to view that. And equally, sort of at the other end, when we're transitioning sort of out of our reproductive years, again, perimenopause, menopause, it's really getting its day on the stage right now, which, I'm equally excited, but equally a bit, what are we even saying, in this phase? But, sort of, again, honouring that because, of course, women become so powerful and so wise and so much more, I think, confident in what they know as they enter that stage of their life. And so the Womanhood Project is really about sort of meeting women wherever they're at, creating these beautiful spaces where we can witness each other, talk through, all of the things that come up for us across our lives and tools and resources to really help kind of move through however you lean, whether you're a heavily medically kind of leaning family or whether, you're more interested in natural, holistic approaches. It's sort of giving you access to all of the things so that then you make that choice for yourself. What aligns for you and your family, and then you kind of go from there. So that's kind of what those spaces are, because I really do need that balance, that real human connection, and almost that belief and that hope that there are other ways that we are kind of moving ourselves forward such that the darkness in the food system moves into the light much more quickly, I guess. And I know that kind of can sound a bit, esoteric and a bit spiritual, but I really think the kind of the manipulation and the underhanded things that are happening, the more we talk about them, the more we bring them up and out, the sooner we're going to make changes in those spaces, I think.
Yes, I love that. It sounds like you're doing so many things, so many interesting things, and I love all the different projects. I could sit here for hours talking to you, but where is the best place for our listeners to find out more about you online? I'll pop all the links that you've sent through to me in the show notes, but is there one or two places that you'd like to kind of direct people to?
The Eat For You website is a great one in terms of that sort of nutritional pesticide kind of story, just to kind of see what we're doing there and how we're doing it. And if that's kind of flagged, maybe we should do that. Amazing. I'd love to. I just get so excited when people are like, yeah, I really want to do that. I guess on Instagram, it's Art Science Being Human. And that's probably where we are the most often. I've got my own account, but honestly, I'm not great online. I'm much better having the face-to-face conversation because, this feeling that kind of, this is not bad actually because I can see you the whole time. So I get to have that kind of energetic exchange. But yeah, I'm a be there with the person.
You're a face-to-face sort of person. Well, yeah. Well, I'll pop all those links in the show notes. And thank you for taking the time to meet me on Zoom and record this conversation because, I totally know what you mean in terms of face-to-face, but I love that we can also get this message out to a lot more people than we could in real life on this podcast. So thank you so much. It's been so good to connect with you. And I want to shout out to Adele on the team here at Natural Super Kids who hooked us up. Adele used to work for Hayley. So very grateful for Adele because this has been an amazing conversation.
It's been a lot of fun, Jess. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much. And yes, hi, Adele. I love you. Thank you.
Thanks, Hayley.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.